So before we get to the second CONCACAF Champions League game between Tigres versus NYCFC, that's going to kick off in about 15 minutes or so, I am going to quickly do the review of the expansion draft that happened today for Austin FC. And the reason why I decided to do it now instead of a couple of hours ago when the draft was over was that I was hoping there was going to be some signings and trade that was linked with the expansion draft. And we kind of saw one immediately after the fifth pick for Austin FC, where they decided to trade one of the player that they got from the expansion draft to another team. But that was pretty much it. I mean, there was really no trades or signings that happened after that was linked with the expansion draft. Now, obviously, that could all change heading into tomorrow, where maybe we're going to see a couple or maybe one of these players that's going to be traded to another team, or there's going to be some move in the expansion draft is going to be linked with this. But that being said, if that's going to happen, I, of course, will mention it in the news of the week. And I also will mention maybe a couple of free agency signings that's going to be happening tomorrow, because tomorrow is going to be the day when free agency does open up in MLS. Now, in terms of the expansion draft itself, well, I'm not going to explain the rules of the expansion draft because I've done that before. And if you want to, of course, know the rules of the expansion draft, you can, of course, watch that video of me talking about expansion draft before, or I'll leave a link in the description below that will show an article on the league website in terms of how the expansion draft works in MLS. But basically, the simple way to kind of explain it is that each of these expansion team gets 5 picks, and that these 5 picks are going to be from teams that are eligible to be in this expansion draft, and also it's from the unprotected list players. So with the first pick of the expansion draft for Austin FC, they got Danny Hoesen from the San Jose Earthquakes. Now, I know this kind of pick just make the Quakes front office look kind of a little bit stupid with the way that there was some Quakes fans that were kind of not happy with the way that Lima, of course, was traded, and that maybe the only reason why they decided to do so is because Austin is probably not going to pick a Quakes player in the expansion draft. Well, it turns out that was not the case, and that they kind of got duped in the way that they were still going to pick a Quakes player in the expansion draft alongside with getting Lima a couple of days ago. But I don't mind seeing them picking up Danny Hoesen, knowing the fact that, he was definitely not coming back with the Quakes, especially the season that he has. And that in some way, I would say this is kind of like a high risk, high reward kind of move, because no doubt that I think Hoesen could definitely be a decent striker, and that he can definitely rediscover his form that he had in the first 2 seasons, which I remember when he came to the Quakes, he was definitely a very good number 9. And I think in 2017, he actually scored double-digit goal and registered 4 assists for the Quakes. But the reason why things eventually didn't work out for him is that he was not in, he just did not work in the Almeyda system, and that Almeyda just don't know how to actually implement it into his system, and eventually he just kind of got rot out of the bench. So again, with Austin now getting Danny Hoesen, I think they could definitely get a player that could maybe rediscover his good form that he had in the first 2 seasons for the Quakes. But that being said, you need to put him in the right system, because if you decided to not put him in the right system and decided to not implement him in the right way, which, by the way, you better put him as a number 9 and don't put him as a winger, despite the fact that we know what happened earlier this season when Almeyda decided to put him in the wing. It just does not work whatsoever. So hopefully Austin is smart enough that they don't make the same mistake that Almeyda and the Quakes did, which is put him on the wing, because he's solely a number 9, and he is a guy that you need to definitely provide some service and put him in the right system for him to get going, because otherwise, if that's not going to be the case, he is definitely going to struggle in terms of trying to score goals. Now, in terms of the second pick for Austin FC, they got Jared Stroud from the New York Red Bulls, and I think out of all of these picks that they eventually kept during this expansion draft, I think this was probably the best one. I mean, I was kind of surprised that the Red Bulls decided to not put Jared Stroud on the protected list, because I thought he had a decent first season with the Red Bulls, and he's one of these players that came out of the Red Bulls academy and probably going to be one of those players that was going to part of the next generation core of players that come out of the Red Bulls Academy, but that just doesn't seem like it's going to be the case anymore because Austin is able to pick him up in the expansion draft. And that, I think, of all these players that could potentially be starters or regular starters for their team, Jared Strout is definitely going to be one of those players that I think could be a regular starters for this Austin FC team. And overall, I just think this is a good picked up for Austin FC, and a really strange one for the Red Bulls to decide to leave him on the unprotected list, and eventually now they of course lose him to the in the expansion draft to Austin FC. Now in the third pick, they got Brady Scott, which is a goalkeeper from Nashville SC, and I think out of all these picks, this one was kind of the one that I was thinking like, who? Because I didn't know much about this guy until I kind of did some research of the fact that he was with the U.S. Youth National Team, and he's a hot prospect in terms of the goalkeeping pool for the U.S. National Team, and that he's only 21 years old. So I'm assuming most likely they picked him up just kind of as a backup option, because I'm pretty sure that they're not going to put Brady Scott as a regular starter, especially he didn't really make any appearance for Nashville SC. Like during the entire season, I don't remember there was one game for Nashville where Joe Willis was not between the sticks. So Scott was kind of just being in that backup position and didn't really get a chance to play in some of these games. And I don't know if it's going to be the same case when he goes to Austin FC, because I think surely Austin is going to look for a much more experienced goalkeeper than a guy that hasn't even got a single start for what was previously an expansion team, that is Nashville SC. Now, in the fourth pick, they, of course, decided to go with Joe Corona from the Galaxy, and this is kind of an interesting one because Corona, obviously, he's a very experienced midfield, and I guess the reason why Austin really wants to get Corona is that they kind of saw what Nashville did with picking up an experienced midfielder in Anibal Godoy, and that trying to use that as kind of a formula and pick Corona, who is another experienced kind of midfielder, and kind of one that I'm pretty sure is one that is not kind of something that the Galaxy fans are really a fan of him, despite the fact that he made a lot of appearance with this team. But still, he's an experienced midfielder. I'm not quite sure if he's going to get regular starter time for this team, but we shall see once everything, of course, pan out. And that, again, of most of these expansion draft pick, and when you look at the history of these expansion draft pick, not a lot of these players that got picked in the expansion draft usually are going to be regular starters for their team, and that some of them, they pretty much just not even get a single minute with the team, and eventually they just kind of trade them off for pennies off the dime. But then finally, in the last pick for Austin FC, and this was the only pick that we actually saw some trade that, of course, happened right after this pick of course happened, and that, of course, is Austin FC decided to pick Kamal Miller from Orlando City, and literally right after they picked him, they decided to trade him to the Montreal Impact for $225,000 general allocation money. And that this move is kind of very similar to what happened last season when, I think, was it Nashville or Miami? I think it was Nashville, the one that they picked up Zarek Valentin, but immediately they decided to trade him off to Houston to get Joe Willis. Now, this time, Austin didn't really get a goalkeeper or even a player from Montreal. They only got like $225,000 GAM for it. But I think overall, I'm pretty sure Austin feel like they need to continue to have some general allocation money, because they spend over $1 million of general allocation money just the previous day making 5 signings. So they're thinking maybe they're a little bit short in terms of that, so that they want to at least get some of that money, and that maybe that is some of the money that they could potentially put use to spend a goalkeeper. Because again, I still think when you look at the squad that Austin FC currently had, goalkeeping is still one of the position, alongside with the center back position, is still one that is a big question mark for this team coming into the expansion season. But for Montreal, getting Kamal Miller, I think this is a very decent signing for the impact, and especially Miller is a guy that is very versatile in terms of the defensive role. And I was actually kind of interested to see that, knowing the fact that the impact play against Olympia in the CONCACAF Champions League, knowing that this draft literally takes place an hour and a half before the game was kicking off, I was actually very interested to see whether or not if he was actually going to be available for the impact in that game. And knowing the fact that he played for Orlando City, and since the tournament takes place in Orlando, I'm pretty sure Miller could have just made a quick drive up to Exploria Stadium and play once again with his former team stadium for the very last time before he of course is gonna pretty much be at Montreal as his new home. But turns out that of course was not the case. Miller didn't play for Montreal in this game or even in the roster. So I guess this is just kind of a case where they just got him a little bit too late before even making him eligible for that game. But that would be quite funny, the fact that you would literally just get a guy just an hour and a half before the game begins, and a guy that thought that he was pretty much on his way on the golf course, and then realize, oh well, now I'm gonna be traded to a team that still have some games that takes place tonight in the CONCACAF Champions League, and now I'm gonna have to get myself ready for that. But of course, that did not happen. But still, overall, as I said, I think Miller is a very good pickup for the Impact. It'll be interesting to see what Austin is going to do with that general allocation money that they of course got him from. But that being said, that is pretty much it for the review of this expansion draft. And when you again, I think when you look at past expansion draft, and that, as I said, with so many of these players that got picked up in each of these expansion draft, it's very we don't usually see a lot of them that actually are going to be regular starters for the team. And who knows, some of these players, they might eventually be sold off or trade off to another team for a couple of more assets. But we of course will see whether or not if that is going to be the case. But let me know in the comments below, what do you think of these picks? Which player do you think is most likely is going to stay with the team and get a regular spots for this Austin team? But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.